everybody. Welcome to the Good Bloke, Not Woke podcast, episode number 4. What a few weeks it's been. The last episode I did, I think I was in Romania when I did the recording, and I've since left there and spent a week in the United States with my partner. I'm back in Melbourne now. And a couple of things about Romania that were amazing. Firstly, when I was packing to leave, I realized that every item of my clothing stunk of cigarette smoke, because in Romania, they still smoke in restaurants. It's amazing. You sort of forget how cigarette smoke permeates everything. But another contrast to that is that you're not allowed to drink at all if you're driving a vehicle. It's like not 0.05, it's 0.00 there in Romania. So, in some ways, they're probably a bit more evolved than we are. Going out running in the mornings, I never saw any other runners, and I'd say g'day to people, but they sort of ignored me. They didn't look at me, didn't talk to me. So there's a really interesting sort of dourness to the consciousness there that you can really feel as a hangover from, the Ceausescu times and the Eastern Bloc rule. But, the place is evolving. There's a lot of exciting things happening there. So anyway, moving on, today I'm going to be interviewing a very old friend, Darren Welch. And Darren and I go way back. And it's so interesting to think about how we met, because in 1983-84, I was gym manager at the Melbourne City Baths. And a young guy worked part-time for us, and he was from Wangaratta, and he came in one night and he said, there's a bloke out in the Austin Hospital in the spinal rehab section who broke his neck playing footy for Wangaratta Rovers. And he hasn't really got any visitors, and he's in the halo. And if you don't know what the halo is, because he broke his neck playing footy. Now, he didn't sever his spinal cord, he crushed it. His name was Greg Rosser, brilliant bloke. And I'd never met Greg before, but the halo is this thing that sits around the head and it bolts into the skull so that they can put a person on full traction. And he had to spend 13 weeks in that, and it's painful. And I used to go out there and he'd be face down on the bed, and I'd sit on the floor and get underneath and just talk to him to keep him company, and we became good mates. And anyway, he asked me afterwards if I would look after his rehab. So his best mate, John Welch, who owned the sports store in Wangaratta, used to drive him down to Melbourne once a month to catch up with me and get an update in his program. And one day John rang me and he said, listen, my 2 boys wouldn't mind a program. Do you think you could do one for them? And so this is where I met Darren, who was 16 at the time, gangly young kid who had big hopes and dreams about being an elite athlete. And and it wasn't until years later when I was conditioning coach at Richmond, or only a few years later, and Darren turned up there playing in the under-19s, and we reconnected, and somehow that rolled forward from there, and we'd swim together. We used to run together. Remember those early morning runs, Darren? And and the funny thing is, I've got a younger brother, Terry, and Darren and Terry were born on exactly the same day, and you couldn't meet 2 more different people. But so that sort of throws astrology out the window, doesn't it? But anyway, we did a lot of stuff. We talked a lot over time. And then in 1998, when I resigned from Hawthorn Football Club as a conditioning coach, Darren rang and said, would you come and work with me at Richmond? So it was a really unique situation, because I was 38, nearly 39. Darren was, 8 years younger than me, and he was going to be my boss. And we can talk about that through the podcast. But what an amazing experience that was, where you really got to put your ego in your back pocket and step up and really enjoy a different experience. And we did some great work together. So a bit about Darren Welch. Darren is a performance coach. He's got 20 years experience working in high performance sport. And he's really recognised as a leader in coaching and high performance culture. He's educated in sports science. He's worked with a range of high performance sporting teams and organisations, including Richmond Football Club, the All Whites, Football Australia, Sydney FC, Victorian Institute of Sport, but also there was Carlton Soccer Club in there, and the Football Kings. And at Victorian Institute of Sport, and Darren's also worked recently in high performance leadership roles supporting the Football Australian Matildas Pathway program in Victoria. And we did a bit of work together on that too, which was really cool. In addition, Darren's obtained a unique perspective from his professional involvement with some of Australia's most outstanding leaders in high performance sport, including Tottenham Hotspur's Football Club manager Ange Postecoglou and Richmond Football Club CEO Brendan Gale. Darren was an accomplished athlete, being a member of the Victorian Cricket Shield squad and Victorian Institute of Sport in cricket. Darren's background in sports science, high performance coaching and culture, and personal athletic journey equips him with a unique skill set and ability to effectively shape and support positive performance transformation within sport. Darren's understanding, drawn from his lifetime invested in sport and high performance, is that the critical element to enriching sport is via setting the conditions that enable new performance to evolve. Wow, that's cool. Just feel that for a moment. In his personal life, Darren is an enthusiastic road cyclist and devoted to family life, no more so than watching his young daughters participate in sport. And they're both very good football players too. So, Darren Welch, welcome to the Good Bloke, Not Woke podcast. Good to see you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, John, and thanks for inviting me in to do this. And yeah, I mean, you just going through that there and the story of our relationship, yeah, it's really special. So to be able to come and speak to you today on something I know, on issues and that you're really passionate about, and equally I'm passionate about, is going to be fun. And also too, ironically, the last thing you mentioned there was you know, I'm passionate about my family no more so than watching my kids play sport. Well, exactly at the moment, if I notice, I'm sitting in a car watching my kids play sport as I'm doing this podcast. So, yeah, how about that?
Well, mate, you're one of the few men apparently that can multitask. It's yeah, but I was really, really keen to have you on the podcast because, you know, as I've said a number of times, this podcast is all about discussing healthy masculinity and really what it takes to help all of us as human beings to evolve and grow and develop a really strong and robust moral compass, and then to have the courage to live by it. And I know that you and I, you know, spent a lot of time talking about these things, and we had a lot of admiration for a lot of the young guys that came through the systems that we worked in. Some of them just had it in spades, where you just knew that you could trust them because their moral compass was unbreakable. Like you mentioned Brendan Gale before, and I think of people like Duncan Kellaway, and then there was the other kids who struggled in that space, and they needed a lot of support.
Yeah.
And I know that, you know, you reached a pretty elite level in cricket, like Shield squad in Victoria, which means you're a short step away from actually getting your opportunity to grab a place in that team and stabilise yourself, which means the next step from that is national level. But you walked away from it at a young age, and I was just really interested in that and what was happening for you at the time.
Yeah, I mean, that was, I think that was a big shock for a lot of people around me, because up until then, you know, everything I'd been doing in my life was really around developing my cricket game to be as good as it could possibly be. So when I stepped away from it, you know, it was a big adjustment and to a lot of people that I'd made that decision. But essentially, I think, you know, in some ways, the environment as such that I was in just wasn't fitting, you know, what I was after. And part of that was really, you know, cricket as a game then was you know, had a lot of very conservative people around there. A lot of people just conformed to being typical of what people felt like they expected. And also too, there wasn't a great deal of care, not just care for me as an individual, but just care for people who were involved in the game. So I actually feel like at that point, you know, I'd made a decision that I was looking for more things in my life, and cricket had to sort of cricket wasn't going to be that.
Yeah, yeah. Courageous decision to make, though, isn't it? When everybody else around you is just waiting for your next level of success, right?
It is really, it is, and I think, but I think something I recognise more as I've got older and I think this is maybe something that where coaches need to and need to understand. I think when you're able to walk away from, it's only when you're able to walk away from something, I think, can you actually ever really be really good at what you do. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that I'm really good at what I do.
At this point in the podcast, Darren's signal started to play up and we lost clarity. So he kindly jumped out of his car so that he could find a better signal and we could continue on. So I reckon if you could just go back and repeat that part again, because that was really cool about, if what you're doing is not aligning with your beliefs. That was a really cool piece.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I feel, John, is that, as a coach, if you're, unable to actually walk away from what you're doing, if it's failing to meet, your beliefs, your values, or alignment with what you're trying to do and what you want to do, then that's where we sometimes become really unstuck. And I guess there's coaches who sometimes feel their greatest fear becomes losing their job or not being able to do it, but they forget actually fundamentally why they're there in the first place. And for us as coaches, we understand we're there to provide service, we're there to provide support, we're there to provide care. That's why we're there. We're there because of them. And so for that reason, if that's not, you're not able to do that because of, for whatever reasons, then you need to be able to walk away.
Yeah, very true. So true. It was interesting when we were working at Richmond Football Club together, and there's a lot of things wrong in the whole culture of the club back then. The leadership was not great.
Yeah.
And, and there was a lot of instability in the coaching department, a lot of emotional stuff going on, very reactive and very difficult. And I remember we sat down one day and we had a conversation and we said, well, we've got to be prepared to lose our jobs because we're here to take care of the players. And I think you said it, that, our loyalty has to be to the fans of this football club. Because at the end of the day, it's their club and we're in service to them. So we've got to stay true to ourselves as opposed to trying to keep other people within the club happy.
Yeah, 100%. And that takes, to be able to do that, takes a lot of bravery, doesn't it? And I mean, we've mentioned Ange before, Ange Postecoglou, and the incredible work he's been doing, not just at Tottenham, his career, all the way through. And one of the defining characteristics of Ange is his bravery. He believes in people. He trusts people. He is prepared to take risk, and he does all these things. And it's no surprise that he's become the success that he's become. That's been a consistency all the way through his career.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to watch it, isn't it? It's
yeah.
And it's not rocket science. It's just integrity and honesty, and him being honest with himself.
Yeah, correct. And with sport, for us, if there's no integrity there, then for me, I'd be disinterested in sport. I think that's just one of the things that, for me, sport has always been a central part of my life. It's something that's given me enormous amounts. So it's something that's been very much part of what I've been all my life. And I guess, like, once there's integrity missing in that, then to me it's what's the point? And I know there's things in relationship our conversation today that are going to probably talk to that point. But yeah, sport needs to have integrity. Without integrity, it becomes nothing.
Yeah, 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 very true. Well, I mean, I suppose that takes me to another point that I remember back when I took over as conditioning coach at Richmond Football Club in 1986. And I decided that I was going to take all distance running out of the preseason program, right?
Yeah,
No 10K runs, no 15K runs. And I was going to do it all with track work, focusing on better technique, a higher workloads, working on recovery. And even now, when I look back at what I gave them, I was overtraining them, but we were learning. Conditioning for AFL football was going through an incredible learning phase back then, probably really initiated by Chris Jones, right? But I got attacked like constantly in the newspapers. There was football legends really beating on me because I wasn't giving the Richmond boys any distance running, and I was going to destroy their season, and they weren't going to be tough enough, and all that sort of stuff. And you have to really endure that stuff, right? And I mean, I was like 26, 27 years of age, but I just trusted that, I knew what I was doing. But when we're at Richmond, you came to me early in the pre-season, and you sat down, and you were my boss, right? But you still came to check in with me, and you said, "Do you mind if I run Matty Richardson's program?" And I said, "Sure. What do you got planned?" And you just said, "Well, I've just got a hunch of a better way to train him." And at that point in time, no conditioning coach had ever gotten a full season out of him. He was always breaking down. And you and I both know that Richo had a profound capacity to generate force. And when Richo decided to work, he worked at a level that was over and above what most people can work,
Yeah.
And anyway, so I said, "Yeah, sure." And anyway, I think that the toughest running session that Richo did for the whole preseason was 6 5-second sprints with about 3 minutes in between reps. That was about right, was it?
Yeah, it was it.
And the instruction to him was, on the first one, "Matthew, you got to run this like it's an Olympic 100-meter final," which he did. And we said, "We're going to mark where you get to." And then on the second rep, you just said to him, "You got to beat it." And so each one of those efforts was such high intensity. That's all he needed to get the adaptations that were required. And so you got the conditioning without him breaking himself down with overdoing it. And consequently, you got 2 consecutive seasons out of him, full seasons, But I look at that and go, man, that was courageous, because people would have been lining up to put you in front of a firing squad if it didn't work.
Well, that's true. And in some things they did put us in against the firing squad too on that. But I guess, like, you look back sometimes and you think about decisions you make, and you think, could I have been a little bit more calculated? Can I have been a little bit more political, and would have that served me better? But ultimately, we've got to deliver what we believe is the truth. Huh?
Yeah.
And in Matthew's situation, there was a unique athlete, but Matthew Richardson was sort of 6'5", something like that. He was, when we first went there, he was about 91, 92 kilos. He was incredibly gifted athletically. He had, you could argue, he had the best endurance in the club, and also he was quick and powerful. But he was, he was a person that needed to be the key sort of player for us, that was going to sort of be able to totally dominate games, and consistently throughout the year, which he did. And I think in that pre-season, he put on about 10 kilos or so. He played at about 104 kilos. He was still incredibly athletic, but his game sort of went into a new dimension. Yeah. And he didn't lose any of that, endurance qualities in that too that were making him unable to sort of sustain himself through games. So I think, like in that situation, John, it's a case then of really understanding we're trying to serve the individual, and there's the traditions of feeling like you have to sort of do things in a certain way because you're going to offend people otherwise. Basically, ultimately just really do a disservice to the individual and also too to the group as a whole, which it would have if we didn't make those adjustments.
Yeah, I agree. It's so interesting, and I think that one of the challenges that I noticed in my time is that as they say, getting old is mandatory, but getting wise is optional, and there is a real challenge for men around footy clubs that things can remain pretty basic.
Yeah.
And it's all about bragging about your conquests. There's a lot of drinking, and I no doubt these days there's party drugs and that sort of thing. And there's a lot of men in those systems that have never really taken the steps to really grow up and show up as responsible, mature, reliable, and trustworthy human beings.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying they're bad people, because that's not what this is about. But I know that you worked in some systems where you had some really, really good people,
Yeah.
leadership, but you also
Yeah.
worked in systems where there's some really awful people because of their immaturity and their and the way they behaved and their inability to be really responsible for their behaviour.
Yeah.
And I just perhaps wanted to sort of give you an opportunity to just talk about those things and how that impacts upon your capacity to do your work, but also on the greater good that those organisations are meant to be delivering to a community.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a lot in that, which you've just said there. I mean, I think, one thing we have to understand, if we look at, say, sporting clubs here, it's a broad church of people we get to work with, and we wouldn't have it any other way, would we? And I've always been drawn to environments in that where it allows me to be around all different types of people coming from all different types of backgrounds. And, I guess basically, hey, I was from Wangaratta. There's a very egalitarian sort of life I had, growing up in terms of the schooling and sports clubs and whatnot that I was fortunate enough to be around. So for me, what we need to be able to do in regards to we're getting into clubs now is understand that, not everyone is going to be the same. And we need to also too, we need to understand not everyone's had the benefits of others. So therefore, it's that we try to give people the opportunities to become the people they could potentially be. That might sound really sort of a bit sort of, all very, nice and everything. But I think, sports clubs do provide that really opportunity to do that. And I think like what you want to have then around is people who are able to then, first of all, provide the leadership that's there. So that's going to be the people that are invested in wanting to help people being better.
Yeah.
And then we need to give the people opportunity to do that, but they've got to find their way, supported, of course, by the leadership. And I think this is a really, it's an interesting thing because it's, I've just read a really great book recently, which was on Wayne Bennett. And he's obviously he is a coach that understands this because he came from a very difficult upbringing. But, ultimately, first and foremost, what we're trying to do is try and help the individual become, a better person overall. And then the athletic side will also too will sort of run its own course. I think when I look at that too, that when we can sometimes in our places and that we can easily sort of forget about those things. We can sometimes get a little bit too fixated on perhaps it might be winning overall than actually the experiences in that we're helping facilitate. And I think really, like, we look at the real high achieving organisations and that. I think ultimately, they kind of get that, and that's where, you know, that's what we need to be all sort of aspiring towards to get to.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's like I take your point there that the really high performing organisations in sport, and perhaps in many other domains as well, it's when the leadership is really, really strong. And I'm not talking about leadership with whips and chairs. I'm talking about really, really strong character. Because when leaders are stable, then, you know, people can trust them, that people can feel safe around them, and then that creates a space where others can then start to grow and become the people that they can become, instead of staying something that they feel will be approved of. You know, and it's
100%.
and it's so cool when you see some of those young guys that, you know, we work with, and how, you know, I caught up with Rory Hilton not long ago and went for a walk, and what an amazing young man he is, you know. And but we could always see that incredible potential, because, you know, you used to say that as soon as he crossed that white line, he turned up to play. You always knew that you were going to get nothing but his absolute best when he ran out in that field. Didn't matter what.
Yeah.
Because he had an incredible character, and you know, like, I really admired that in a lot of those kids. And then there was other kids who were struggling. They came from tougher backgrounds, and it just took a while. But the other thing is, it's like, you know, our reach right across sport and where we reach into the community. I remember, I mean, you'll remember this. We played footy together. Remember that? We played some Club 18 footy in the amateurs, and it's not real serious footy. And we went across and played a game over at Footscray Tech Old Boys, and our team were originally from, you know, Brighton area, Old Haileybury, that sort of thing. And so our blokes weren't really up for fighting or anything. They just loved a game of footy, and we turned up over there at Footscray Tech, and I decided that day that I was going to coach from the sideline so that other people could get a game, you know, remember that?
I do.
And the opposition were just behaving so badly in the first quarter. They were punching and kicking and wanting to fight. And you know, thought, my God, what's going on here, you know? And remember, it was like a crossover point at quarter time when you guys are all walking into me looking really dejected. I thought, you know, you can't put up with another 3/4 of that, you know. And so there was a spur of the moment decision. Remember, the whole team, we walked across to the other team, and they turned as if to go, what's going on here? And I just said to the coach, mate, listen, we're not playing for sheep stations here. I don't know what you guys are up to, but, you know, we didn't come here for this. We came here to have a game of footy with you. And, you know, we can either have a good game of footy, or I'll go and strip and I'll put my gear on and I'll come back and I'll do to you double what you're doing to us, you know, but I don't want to do that. And I said, if you can figure it out, we'll come inside afterwards and put some money across your bar, you know. And walked away, and it was amazing. Like, it was a great game after that. I can't remember who won. Do you remember who won?
I don't, but I'll always remember that that address you gave both teams. It's the first time I've seen a coach actually address both teams at quarter time, I've got to say. But actually, you're probably being a little bit kind to yourself in what you described there, because what you actually did say there was you brought the teams together and reminded that the teams the way that both teams were potentially behaving there, were behaving, was exactly how the greater organisation, the football, actually felt about these two teams, and would be perhaps good reasons why the organisation would want to get rid of us. And I think what we then have is you had both teams then feeling coming onto common ground, understanding, well, that's exactly right, and, you know, we got to be better than this. and when we went and then went played football, and also too went and enjoyed a drink after the game with nothing silly, and were able to share. And I think that's again what sport is able to do. Provided you have the right people and leadership around who are giving the right types of messages, and clearly on that day you did give the right message. Mind you, I did want to come off at quarter time.
I get it, but it was like, and the reality is when we got into the rooms after the game and had a drink with them, they're really good blokes.
Yeah, always.
It's it's quite amazing. Now, I mean, there's a sensitive area. You've fairly recently stepped down from a role in an organisation where you're in a high performance position, looking after athletes, and there was some stuff going on in the organisation that wasn't cool, and we won't name the organisation today, but that must have been difficult for you to walk away from that.
It's incredibly difficult and really disappointing and really sad. And even now, I'm still really saddened by it, and I haven't completely got over it at this point. I guess, like, for me, here's the thing, like in anything we do, if we're talking about sporting clubs, I think a sign of a good sporting club will be the lack of roadkill we see around the sporting club.
Yeah.
And I think when you're seeing a lot of roadkill around a sporting club, regardless of how many trophies they're winning or how many supporters they're getting or whatever, that's something that needs to be sorted. And I think in the situation, my most recent situation there, because it was at developmental level and it was impacting kids, then that takes on a whole different level of responsibility, and where you have to make these sorts of decisions. I think, like in that one too, I think it also reflects too the importance of making sure you do have the right people around, and before we worry about making that the people we want to have around need to be competent at what they do. And I think competency is often something that's missed, unfortunately. And when you're getting people around who are, for whatever reasons, are lacking the skills or whatnot to be able to, perform their roles, you're really setting yourself up for roadkill.
Yeah.
And that's what was going on.
And I think when you've got people in positions of the higher realms of leadership, they're actually using that for their own social status and their own power.
Yeah.
Right? That just has a catastrophic ripple effect through the organisation.
Yeah, it really does. And like, John, I just think, like, I mean, how much more years will I coach? I mean, hopefully I'm coaching another 10 or so years, and then I'll be sitting in a grandstand somewhere or watching it on cable or whatever. But I would say, as you go further along, you start to ask more questions about what it's actually all about. And I think, like, nothing for me, probably, I think this incident might have been 3-4 years ago. I was in a supermarket and I ran into an ex-athlete that I'd been working with some years ago. And we've all probably had this experience before, where you run into someone on the street and sometimes you feel, actually, that person actually deliberately doesn't want to see me. You know what I mean? They're trying to avoid me. Well, in this situation, I hadn't seen this particular person for some time, and when we caught eyes, it was just sort of like, they lit up, and we just quickly came to each other, and we had a really good chat for a couple of minutes, and it was really nice and warm, and I left the supermarket feeling just really good about just that little contact that I had. But the point out of it is that person I work with, they did very well when they played, but as a team, we weren't anything exceptional. And we also had a little bit of turmoil at times with different things that were happening around the club at that time. But nonetheless, clearly it was a time we shared together. It was special.
Yeah.
And me seeing him and him seeing me just brought us back together to that time,
Yeah.
And to me, that's what it's all about, because it's like, if it's not worth it, now, it's not going to be worth it then, later, and I think, life is can be wonderful, it's precious and all of that. So if we're investing in something, and for example, if I'm got responsibilities to be doing a training session with some people, you want to make it to be the best possible experience for that person, because they're giving you their precious, minutes on this world.
Yeah.
And I think, like, if we approach it that way and understand it that way, I think actually it somewhat can be a game changer, I feel.
Yeah.
But if we because ultimately at the end of the day, you like to feel that your moments with other people have been moments in that which have actually only made their lives better, not worse.
Yeah. 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 It's pretty spot on, really, isn't it? It's that incredible. Well, like I always felt working in the AFL, all those times I got to work with the soccer players through you, it was such a privilege to to actually get to work with people like that who have got, such an opportunity to touch so many lives. I mean,
Yeah.
I remember when I was 23, I went and spent some time at the San Francisco 49ers.
Yep.
And I couldn't believe how much they spent on strapping tape. And the guy said to me, well, put it this way. He said, do you know what happens to people if they turn the TV on Sunday night to watch Sunday night football and Joe Montana's not on the ground because he's got an ankle injury? It can destroy their whole week. He said, so we spend whatever it takes to tape them up,
Yeah.
And the reality is that when you do, I'm going to tell you a little story, right? So the work that you put into Matthew Richardson, for example, now I was only with Matthew for a year and we did some really good work together, but you
Yep.
did some amazing work with him. And I've spoken on the podcast before about what a beautiful human being Matthew is, just
Yep.
the kindest people I ever met on footy. And a good friend of mine's son turned 16 last Sunday. And on the 3rd of January, he had a terrible accident. He was driving a buggy type car on a property up in the bush, and he rolled it and he crushed his hand so badly that, even to this day, there's a slight risk he could still lose his hand.
Yeah.
So he's had so many surgeries and skin grafts, and his dad's an angry man, and giving his mum a hard time. They're not together, and his mum, who's one of my best friends, she's just been a tireless worker supporting her son through the highs and lows, in and out of hospital, just been terrible. And in that time, Sue's dad passed away as well,
Yep.
And anyway, her son is a Richmond supporter. So I reached out to the network, and Matty Richardson said, look, I can't drop in, but can I send him a video message? And the video message, Darren, oh my God, Richo just opened his heart up and he touched that young man so profoundly, and he touched his mum so profoundly. It was just such a gift,
Yeah.
And I rang Brendan Gale as well. And Brendan said, look, bring him down to training one night. We'll get the boys all around him and, we'll really lift his spirits. And it's like, that's the decency of those young men who were once athletes that you and I got to work with,
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's such a privilege to see those young athletes and how they turn out. And it doesn't happen by accident.
No. Yeah. I mean, that's and it's interesting that even using Matthew as an example there, he was doing that in his younger life. It's been a consistency all the way through, of a person who really does get it, doesn't he? In regards, and he's I think the story you told me once where he came out to him, he might have been injured or something, or had been bumped or hit, knocked to the side of the field. You went out to see what he was okay, and people were yelling and swearing at him and spitting on him, and you said to him, you're not happy about that, are you? And he said, John, take it easy. He said, you know, they're paying my bills, you know. So it was, he was always very generous, and he still is. So yeah, it's really nice to hear it.
Yeah, no, it's very cool. Well, mate, I suppose, we've been talking for a while now. Is there any other things that you'd sort of like to bring up in terms of, well, for example, you've been working with, you've got your young daughters now, and
Yeah,
your older daughter's got a boyfriend, and they're playing football at an elite level.
yeah,
And it's like you've sort of really nurtured them to try to be able to make good decisions in their lives. Is
yeah.
there anything that you'd like to add to that sort of stuff in terms of, a mature age man who's trying to pass on some wisdom to the young people around you?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's a little bit like, I think, like coaching. I think you got to know when to stay out of the way, you know. And there was a famous Italian coach, the surname of Trapattoni, who made a comment one day, which I love, which is that coaches we can make athletes 80% worse and 5% better. And I think what he meant by that was, like the understanding too, that essentially what we do is we can help guide people and we can support them, but ultimately it's to them, isn't it? And I think like what we got to try to do all the time is the examples we set up as leaders, but also too just the unconditional love and care that we just got to consistently give, and that is key. But like, yeah, when to come in. Often it's allowed sort of, you got to let them crash, don't we, John?
Yeah,
And I think that kind of relates too back to our young athletes, or we say, it could be young men coming into their clubs, and that we also got to understand too, we got to allow them to crash. We don't want to be going in that way where we're becoming, judgmental of everything, and sort of in a way we're trying to make them do things and that they've got to find who they are, So what we've got to do is try to create in our ways, out the conditions in that for them to be able to, become the incredible people they potentially will be or can be. But it's not about us telling them how to behave. It's about us being able to sort of like, try to give them those opportunities so that when they do evolve, where they're doing the things like Matthew Richardson or Brennan Gale are doing now, and just truly very good people.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So true. So true. Well, I've got a question I've been asking everybody.
Yeah, go.
You were coming up through the ranks. Was there a man in your life that you sort of looked at and went, that's the sort of person I want to be, like someone that you perhaps modeled yourself on, and to some extent perhaps, and what was it about that man?
Yeah. I reckon with me, I think in my situation, it depends on where I am with my life. But when I was younger, and as a boy, I would have been looking to my favourite sports people. So, for example, Greg Chappell. There were so many posters of Greg on the wall. And wanting to try to bat in his style and walk like him and be him. And then you come into people as you're starting to go through your adolescence. I feel that they make a real impression. I think people actually make an impression, but people who you feel are actually people that really believe in you, and you were certainly one of them, which I was fortunate enough to come into at the age of 16, when so much change is going on with me at that time of my life. And then I think as I've continued to sort of to grow older, I'm starting to look more at different coaches and leaders out there, maybe people who have are able to influence in a really positive way, that I've grown to. So it's varied depending on where I've been at, in my life at that time. But it's I guess it's always perhaps in some ways mirrored to a little bit where I'm at as terms of my aspirations.
Yeah, yeah.
What about yours?
Well, yeah, I mean, I did talk about it in my first podcast. I talked about my dad's brother and what an extraordinary man he was, and what a role model he was. But I was just going to say about Greg Chappell, it's like, as you know, I know Greg quite well, and he's a wonderful bloke. And, he revealed to me many years ago that, during his time playing for Australia, he was a chronic migraine sufferer.
Mm.
And some of his greatest innings for Australia, he had a migraine. And, and, and you think, what could he have done if he didn't have a thumping headache, Like, it was just... But I then think about the level of self-discipline that the man had to keep himself on track and not sort of pull the pin and go and say, "Hey, everybody, I feel sick." My mind boggles sometimes when I think about that. So but I think we all, when we were kids, we used to watch Greg bat and try and bat in his style, because he was just like the hero of the nation at the time,
Right, and actually interesting, isn't it too, Greg? And as he finishes his cricket, and then he's writing books about men's health, and those things. So he's a champion, isn't he? Huh?
Yeah, he really is, and he's still got a lot to say these days. Well, I just want to, and also each week I try to pick up something that's happening in sport, and I wanted to throw this out there because I thought you might have some perspectives on it. And this is a topic that's pretty controversial, and some would say you shouldn't mention it, but people told me I shouldn't call my podcast what I've called it. I was listening to a podcast conversation just this morning between Joe Rogan and Dr. Phil.
Yeah.
And they dived into the topics of trans women invading female sports.
Yeah.
And not long ago, I listened to a podcast interview where Jordan Peterson was interviewing American swimmer Riley Gaines.
Yeah.
I remember watching Riley Gaines' uncle playing NFL football, and her dad was a great college footballer as well. And, she's a really tough kid, and she's really stood up for women's rights because there's been basically men identifying as women coming in and competing and stealing all the trophies.
Yeah.
And I just look at that and think, so she's been really shouted down. She's been attacked by a lot of people for being so harsh. But I think about it, Darren, and think about, as a society, how much women have fought to gain their rightful place in society. I don't know whether you want to call it equality or just to be able to stand up and be who they are. And then all of a sudden, this fad comes along and starts invading that, and everybody's too frightened to stand up and talk about it.
Yeah.
I feel like us men in society have got to stand up and talk about it and say, no way. If you're a man and you think you're a woman and you want to identify as that, great. Go and set up your own competition for people like you, but stay away from the girls.
Yeah. I think, I guess there's a couple of, things that sort of immediately, come to mind on that sort of topic. I think like the first time I read that, and I sort of like, I looked at it as an elite sport, and I thought, well, basically that would create an unfair advantage. Mm-hmm. And I think like when you work in elite sport, you're always looking to find competitive advantage. Yeah. And when you find competitive advantage, that means you win, and then everyone around then needs to sort of like, follow that same sort of trajectory of sorts. Yeah. And so what ends up happening it changes. So EPO would be an example of that in cycling. The uproar when Lance Armstrong was done, and then how much that brought to light of the drug taking out there, and it turned a lot of people away from sport, because the sport, then the integrity of it is missing, and without the integrity, then actually what are we actually looking at? Yeah. So I think like in this whole situation, you can see that if that was to occur, that would be you would see that that would be the girls who are playing would be really disadvantaged from, I mean, not only just being able to have a fair opportunity to win, but also too even to be able to have the opportunity to perform and play at the elite level.
Yeah.
So that would be again, a situation which would be, well, I can think about it from it as an aspiring athlete myself, and we think of people like Raylene Boyle. We grew up, I remember in the 70s and 80s, and there was always I'm talking about the Eastern Bloc, and you've just sort of come out of there, John, and you know, the people who had been denied opportunities to be able to actually know exactly where they stood in terms of competition, simply because they were up against people who were effectively drug cheats.
Yeah.
So there's that part of it, and the other part of it is what you said there, and I feel in all this that I did notice too that when I did see that story originally, just that there was people were unable to not coming out and actually just talking about it. And I could imagine perhaps, or could I maybe think it's concern about being judged at what they might say, or just maybe even just avoiding being able to draw into, you know, that type of conversation. But when we cut down that kind of conversation, we're actually really going backwards, aren't we? You know, and I think you know, it's unfortunate, because what we need to have in all this, we need to have collective wisdom. And you know, if you ask that question now, you have a lot of people who which I have noticed, which will actually just shy away from just being able to offer their, you know, their perspectives. And like for me, like I come from, I'm Wangaratta. Like, it was a very conservative, you know, town. It has a lot of faults. You know, there's a lot of stuff you've had to try to learn and to sort of try to, you know, fill my life. But, you know, it's got to start by basically being able to at least ask the question, and also to be better informed, and not by people shying away from basically from their responsibility, I feel, to be able to come in and to be able to offer points of view, and that can be really important for others to hear.
Yeah.
Does that sound fair?
That's what I was saying earlier. You know, it's like it's number one is having the moral code.
Yeah.
So it's having the courage to live by it. And I think that there's a real sort of void of courage right now. And
yeah, I would agree, John. And that gets back to, you know, we were talking about the, you know, incidents before, but, you know, in an organisation where I had to left, you know, not so long ago because of things going on. It's actually, you know, when people start to you know, to just allow the politics to dictate, it gets dangerous, you know. And I think what we do need to have is people who are able to, you know, deliver the integrity that they're there to deliver. But I think we're in some ways we're finding people are not necessarily, we're not all necessarily sharing that responsibility these days, huh?
No. Well, so that fear of being judged, you know, a lot of people suffer from that. But again, that's the courage point, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, and it's like, you know, goodness, you know, the moment we start to sort of censor, you know, people, or we don't even give people the opportunity to come in, and decisions are made without proper, you know, robust, you know, conversations, and that it's dangerous. And what we actually end up doing anyway, with a lot of this type of thing, I feel, is that we potentially, in the end, that we do an enormous disservice to everybody, you know. And even sometimes people who are, you know, at this time maybe, you know, playing the wrong card, you know, because you know, what we need to do is we need to make sure we're making the right decisions. And we can only make the right decisions in anything we're doing if we're allowing all that information to come out, and we're able to sort of, you know, understand it and how it needs to be understood, which is actually the truth, whatever that is, you know, whether it sort of fits the political, you know, situation in the moment, or an agenda, or whatever it means. We need to be always sort of looking for that.
Yeah, very true. Well, mate, we're going to finish up there. I've got a couple of thoughts for the week. They're both anonymous quotes that I found, but I really like them.
Yeah.
That says, in a world full of evil, being a good person is an act of defiance. And the other one is, when you can't control what is happening, challenge yourself to control how you respond to what is happening. That's where your power is.
Yeah, how's that? I like that. I like that. I actually really like that because you know, it's this idea for a while we actually thought we could control the world, but we actually realise now we can't, huh?
It's funny.
And and once we actually accept that, actually I think things feel a little bit better, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. So true. Oh, thank you so much for being part of this. I've really enjoyed the chat, and I'm sure we could talk for hours and hours. We could open this up to all sorts of things because there's so many great stories there. But maybe another time. But anyway, in closing, thank you for coming on.
Thanks, John. Thanks for having me. And again, I'd love to come back someday and have another chat to you about these things. I'm sure there's always plenty of things to talk about, and keep your good work up. I know you've always been passionate about trying to help things to be better, and trying to help others to have great opportunities. So I guess this is another way that you're trying to do that. So again, keep it going, John, and let's hopefully we get an opportunity to if we're not having a chat on a podcast soon, at least having a coffee and a swim.
Sounds like a plan, mate. Very
All
good.
right. Good on you, John.
Okay, everybody. So thanks so much, and don't forget, be the man you needed when you were a kid and you're in trouble or you're frightened. Thanks very much.